Moses Burton was a farmer, sheriff, and politician who served 4 terms in the Texas State Senate. Burton was born into slavery in North Carolina and brought to Texas when he was 21. After emancipation, he bought land in Fort Bend County and was eventually elected the first black sheriff in the country.
Are you registered to vote?
No, I'm not. I have tried twice, and I was turned down both times. Lost my job.
You had Jim Crow laws, you had poll taxes, and slowly you see things that are going backwards.
So the first way you see a push against black political organizing is through the Klan. Thousands of people would sometimes show up to watch a crowd of people lynch, burn, and mutilate, in some cases, black bodies. The people who were lynched were usually people who stood up for themselves economically or politically. Self-styled, so-called militias were using violence to subdue black voters. By the 1890s, enough violent intimidation had happened that you have white Democrats returning to power in states across the former Confederacy.
TIS.
The fact that we're still struggling with attempts to disfranchise voters shows exactly why we have to look at segregation as this multi-pronged attack on equality.
Dr. Martin Luther King's second day of civil rights testing in Selma, Alabama started off smoothly enough. But when the would-be registrants and those who accompanied them arrived at the Dallas County Courthouse, it was a different story.
Segregation was labeled separate but equal, but was far from it. Religious leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Fred Shuttleworth, and Houston's Reverend Bill Lawson began to help in protest against it.
The movement spreads across the South. Students at Texas Southern University especially begin to boycott and then gain allies, in some cases from white students from nearby colleges.
13 of them, to be precise. On March 4th, 1960, they marched, but they went to the lunch counters at the wine gardens on Alameda, and they sat, and they sat. And so they initiated the civil rights movement in Houston, Texas.
The support and mentorship of Reverend Lawson and other folks was especially significant because in some cases, the older generation sometimes agreed more with the strategies of the NAACP, who were using the courts and using the law. Because it's important to remember that technically sit-ins are illegal.
They know that what they are doing could potentially put them in danger. They're thinking about the injustices that their parents have faced, that their relatives face. They're thinking about the injustice that they themselves are facing in a world that is supposed to be separate and equal, but is everything but equal. Well, historically, black colleges and universities, their history is related to the fact that our nation was not ready for people of African descent to study with white Americans.
Prairie View A&M is a direct result of Juneteenth. Those individuals who heard that message that day, they went forth with the zeal and the fervor to realize what an education could do for emancipated blacks. Most importantly, now you have individuals who could not read, who could not write, that came and got remedial lessons here and could go back out into their communities to be productive people.
I chose TSU because there was a sense of belonging that I felt when I walked on the campus. It felt like family, it felt like home, and it gave me a feeling of purpose and that I was destined to be here for a specific reason.
And we know that Prairie View produces productive people. And that's one of the mottos here at this school, and it's very much tied back to that same group, that first generation who came here, who studied, who thrived, and sought to make their communities better.
And as a little girl, to me, the building, Hannah Hall, was colossal. Little did I know that one day I would have the opportunity to teach at this school. This institution has been a beacon of light to people in the community.
When it came to primary education, the Gregory Institute became the high school for Houston's black children in the 1870s. At one point, it was the only high school for black students. In 1871, Harris County had the largest number of black students in school in Texas, with 734 males and 760 females. The Gregory School is now home to the African American Library. After years of fighting and debate, Betsy Ross Elementary became the first public school in Houston to integrate. The year, 1960. But even as the Houston School District began to eliminate segregation, there was pushback from white parents, as shown here in a 1970 New York Times article.
You know, it's really amazing how this area, this park, has blossomed and transformed in this community.
It is incredible when you think about the history of Emancipation Park. You know, there was a time when this was the only park that blacks in Houston could come to.
And today we've seen people of all colors here.
All colors, all races, all religions, enjoying the city, enjoying the park together.
Yeah, a park for all.
A park for all.
What do you think your great-grandfather, who purchased this property to create Emancipation Park, would think of what is happening on this site today?
I'm sure he probably never thought about, would this be continued 100 years later, 150 years later. But I think he would be extremely proud to know that the citizens of Houston, Texas have continued to celebrate the Juneteenth.
Emancipation Park remains a pillar in the black community, just as it did when it opened in 1872. From playgrounds, basketball courts, a theater, and the arts, it celebrates a rich history while educating the next generation. But getting that education in schools has not been easy.
I think it's just a history that some people are still so uncomfortable talking about.
We always knew what Juneteenth was. The rest of the country did not. Juneteenth isn't taught in American history. Juneteenth isn't taught in our school, in our public school system.
I guess within the last 30 years that I've learned really a lot about Juneteenth. Attending segregated schools, we just didn't have a lot of information about slavery, and if it was presented, it was presented in such a watered down way. We knew the significance of Galveston to Juneteenth, or the freeing of the slaves.
Juneteenth is so important, and it's funny, I didn't learn about it fully until I got to college, and at this HBCU that I learned about it.
As a former longtime educator, how important is that for students to be presented that information in their general education?
It's America's history. We hear the stories of immigrants coming to the United States. We hear about why they wanted to leave or why they want to be here. And everything that happens in the United States is United States history.
All Americans need to understand when and how slaves were freed in the state of Texas.
I know that in my own class, when I'm teaching in the summer, I make sure that we do a focus on Juneteenth and we celebrate the day so that students are aware of the significance of the day and also of the significance of TSU in continuing the message of Juneteenth.
It's a huge problem not teaching youth about the history. When you go back and you say, this didn't happen, then a young person will be like, oh, so what's their problem? That never happened. So then you create more of a division between cultures